When can free speech be considered dangerous? And how far should governments go to police and to regulate people's opinions? The rise of the internet has led to renewed debate over questions like these, and Malaysia is just one country where that debate is now being conducted in court. 2 local bloggers are being sued over comments made on their blogs, and there is pressure in the country to enforce all bloggers register with the government. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we consider the rise of the blogger and ask, does regulation amount to censorship? The international media watchdog Reporters Without Borders ranks Malaysia at 92 out of 168 countries when it comes to press freedom. Most of the media is considered to be subservient to government interests. So after Jeff Wee and Aharuddin Atan began airing opinions and observations out of step with the mainstream, few people were surprised that they landed in hot water. Howell Davis has the story.
Using computers to fight one's opponents is nothing new. But a David and Goliath battle in Malaysia's courts is seeing 2 of the country's best-known bloggers battling with one of the country's leading English-language newspapers. Jeff Wee and Aharuddin Atan, better known as Rocky, are both facing defamation suits in cases brought by the New Straits Times. It's the first time bloggers have faced such charges in Malaysia, and campaigners for free speech say it could have severe implications for media freedoms.
The impact of this, especially given that there is already a climate where, in Malaysia, where freedom of expression is seen as, it's not seen as a right, it's seen as a privilege, and it's very much curtailed through various pieces of legislation. So this is just another way in which freedom of expression online and offline is being curtailed.
Such worries are heightened by the fact that the New Straits Times has close links to the government, and by massive payouts in previous cases which have all but ruined those convicted of defamation. Worries about defamation, the need to apply for annual licenses simply to publish, and vaguely worded laws on sedition have all served to cow much of Malaysia's newspaper industry. But new media was meant to be different. Malaysia has tried to sell itself as a bastion of modernisation, with IT at the heart of its reinvention. Foreign investors, it was felt, wouldn't set up shop if they were being censored, so a space for free expression was created. Into this space came bloggers like Jeff Wee, publishing stories that the mainstream media ignored. He's been blogging for more than 3 years now, but fears that people like him face a more difficult future.
It seems like things are brewing on the horizon. For example, you have ministers consistently holding veiled threats about reining in the bloggers, and you also have the Prime Minister time again who cited sedition and defamation against the bloggers, and he said, you can't run away from law. I took that as a sign of forewarning.
He says he'll carry on blogging though, seeing it as a crucial way for Malaysia's people to communicate their opinions and thoughts.
With internet, it enables the people, bottom-up society to say their piece. And I think we have to accommodate that new form of communication between policymakers, the mass media, and the general masses altogether. That is a new world, and I thought that we shouldn't desert that opportunity that easily.
That's a point echoed by his co-accused, who argues that the internet is providing voters with the information they need to make informed choices.
Blogs provide a channel, not just for the common people, the laymen, but also for professionals like me to actually take up important issues, serious issues, which are of concern to the average citizen, the voting population, and in a way, we are complementing what the mainstream media should be doing.
But some, particularly in the mass media, argue that bloggers are less careful when it comes to checking facts. And in a country like Malaysia, with a delicate ethnic and religious balance, they say there's a need for extra caution.
In a very mixed society like Malaysia, we have many different groups based on religion and race. And so there's a need, I think, to be responsible, not in a very narrow political sense, but to not create unnecessary friction or problems like that in society.
That may be true, but the bloggers argue that the heavy hand of legal action is an overreaction and counterproductive. Their blogs have now gathered far more publicity than they would have done otherwise, while the internet community has rallied round. Meaning it's still unclear who'll land the final knockout punch in this online battle.
Well, I am joined in our studio by Patrick Teo, who's a full-time blogger here in Malaysia, by Dr. Shad Salim Faruqi, a professor of law, and by Cherian George, a lecturer in journalism at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Professor, let me begin with you, if I might, and begin from the very beginning. What does Malaysian law say about freedom of speech, and what is the accepted cultural understanding of freedom of speech?
One has to make a distinction between law and reality. If you talk of the law, there is no doubt about it, the powers of the government are virtually unlimited. In 50 years, no one has won a case in the courts against a piece of legislation. But if you talk of the ground reality, then differences may occur. The daily media is controlled, but magazines come out with a great deal of critical stuff. Electronic media, the TV is controlled, but on the other hand, up to now, the blogs have been quite free.
So the imposition of the law may be slightly patchy, but nonetheless, the government really holds all the cards here. Cherian George, let me come to you. I mean, in Singapore, you've had your own run-ins with the government over issues of journalistic freedom. Explain, is it a similar situation there? What is the experience for the average journalist, and how do they behave as a consequence?
Well, as you know, I mean, Singapore and Malaysia at one level could be described as twins separated at birth, very similar in many respects. And I would agree with Professor that the laws do give the government almost unlimited power. The reality, though, is that Singapore, like Malaysia, is not exactly North Korea or Myanmar. There is, in practice, quite a bit of freedom for professionals to do their professional bidding. No one is under any illusions, though, that the government can, if it wants, impose severe restrictions.
And that brings us to this case in Malaysia, with particular regards Jeff Wee and Rocky, because the issue at stake here is whether the government is actually pursuing the bloggers as a consequence of what they are saying and what they don't like.
I think if I may just butt in here, Timur. I mean, we've just seen this little video clip about Rocky and Jeff Wee and what they're being sued for defamation. We've heard from the two learned gentlemen about press freedom, freedom of speech, government legislation, blah, blah, blah. Now, I think of myself as an ordinary Joe, man in the street who writes blogs and who voices out my opinion on things that affect my daily life. As far as I'm concerned, freedom of speech, government legislation is the last thing on my mind. After all, government, who elects the government? It's people like me who make up the majority. People who don't really think on a daily basis about freedom of speech, Article 11 or whatever, you know? People who every day have things that affect them. The traffic's bad. I'm breathing in bad air. My children's school teachers are not good enough, and so on and so forth. And they use the blogs to voice their opinions and their feelings.
The point I'd like to make first, though, before we get into the actual practice of blogging right now, is simply the legal basis of Jeff Wee and Rocky's predicament right now. And that is, the argument is what is being brought here as a private case. I'm trying to illustrate the possibility, given the Singapore experience and given what you have told us about Malaysian law, that in fact what is going on here is an attempt by the government to stifle a particular voice, not by the private sector to address a particular private grievance. Would you say that's a fair assessment, or do you really think that there is behind this purely private motive?
Well, If there is a defamatory statement, then I think in all fairness, those who have been defamed have a right to vindicate themselves.
Of course, but the question here is what exactly is going on? And again, let me put it in a Singapore context, because in Singapore you're very familiar with this. The government uses the laws of defamation and uses laws that don't really have anything to do with free speech to stop people from saying what they don't like to hear. Is that not the case?
Well, it could be said that certainly in the case of Singapore, defamation law has been used to an extent that is uncommon in most free jurisdictions. But I think the government would still maintain in Singapore that it is simply exercising the right to defend its reputation. That's what the politicians say. The Malaysian case is, I guess, different because it's not government officials who are going after these blogs. And I suppose only time will tell whether they have a legitimate grievance. I would like to say, though, that I think I certainly would not like to live in a society where individuals and institutions don't have the right to defend their reputations, and that is what defamation law is for.
But
so it would be premature.
Let me just address that point that you just made, though. From your perspective as a blogger, do you really believe that this case is not the government at all? The newspapers involved, the New Straits Times rather, is in fact bringing a private case, or do you think there is a much broader underlying case going on?
I don't want to believe there's anything broader than that. I mean, two guys write some things about a few other guys, and a few other guys say it's defamatory, so I sue you. Now, if the two guys who wrote about them originally can say, all right, we wrote about these things and here are the facts to back it up. If you want to make a case out of it, let's go to court. And I will accuse you in court of all these wrongdoings. That would be what I'd like to see happen. I mean, not write whatever you want, not based on hard facts and accuse somebody or, you know.
Very quickly, though, does the fact that this case has been brought, does that not make you think twice about what you put in your blog, irrespective of whether you can back it up?
No, because I am an ordinary citizen who talks in my blog. Now, if I am not stupid to accuse somebody of something which I cannot prove, I would never do that, even whether it's a blogger or as an ordinary citizen.
Clearly, one of the problems here, though, is that many people do, and this is one of the issues that comes up in this debate wherever it's had anywhere around the world. Let's take a break there. We'll come back and address that very issue. We'll join you very shortly. And welcome back to 101 East. We're talking this week about blogging in general and blogging in Malaysia in particular. I'm joined in the studio by Patrick Teo, a full-time blogger in Malaysia. Dr. Shad Salim Faruqi is a professor of law here in Malaysia. And Cherian George is a lecturer in journalism at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Gentlemen, thanks for staying with us. Cherian George, let me come to you for a moment. We were talking moments ago about the damage that bloggers can cause, and the damage can cause by people who don't tell the truth. Now, in your current capacity as a lecturer in media studies, how damaging is it that freedom of speech can contain misleading, erroneous information?
Well, obviously there are situations, real and hypothetical, that would lead us to conclude quite rightly that freedom of expression can have severe downsides. And I think every society would want to mitigate it somehow.
How far does that principle go, though? I mean, if Oprah Winfrey, who has an enormous platform for her opinions and her perspectives, puts out some information which is erroneous, does that come into the same ballpark that we're speaking of here?
Well, I think the problem can be looked into like this, that there are defenses available in the law. So, for example, if it's defamatory, if there's a charge of defamation, truth is an absolute defense. It doesn't have to be 100% true, substantially true. Courts will decide.
Let's look at a case in Malaysia that came up many years ago, the case of Malaysia Kini, or the individuals that set up Malaysia Kini. Stephen Gan was a journalist in Malaysia who wrote an article about Semenyih, a camp in Malaysia where apparently atrocities were being committed under the nose of the government. That information was not allowed to hit the media. It was suppressed by the government. It subsequently did come to the attention of the media through other means, and it's still a case in point. Now, Is it irresponsible for a journalist or a blogger or a government official to put out information like that?
There are a lot of assumptions being made by both governments and ministers and courts of law that assume that bloggers are stupid, that they have no minds of their own, that whatever you put on the net in a blog, they'll say, oh, okay, that's true. I mean, I think that's a very dangerous assumption, and it can lead to overblown cases like what we've just seen. And I was just going to say before we took the break that perhaps this Jeff Ooi and Rock Hee case is actually a covert operation by some authorities to instill fear into the minds of bloggers, like this is going to happen. But if we took a step back and really look at the case, I would ignore it totally. I wouldn't go out to the courts to support it. I would tell everybody to let's chill it.
Patrick
and not
raises
give them the opportunity to.
Interesting point that I think is valid across Asia and probably across the world, that many societies that do not respect freedom of expression tend to use as an excuse, the harm that can be caused by information, and often the scenarios really are exaggerated. And I think, as you say, the intelligence of the ordinary viewer or reader is often severely underestimated.
Right.
It's often assumed that just because a certain rumor comes out, that the whole society will collapse.
Let me just put out the idea here that is this all just a storm in a teacup? The Stephen Gann and the Malaysia Kini example is quite an instructive one, because 10 years ago, when Malaysia Kini started causing waves in the Malaysian political environment...
Stephen Gann and...
Can I just finish the thought? That website is now almost mainstream. I was in Dr. Mahathir Mohamad's office only recently, and he has on his desk a printout of the website in which they called him Newsmaker of the Year, and he apparently was quite proud of it. Do you think in years to come blogs will also be regarded simply as mainstream, and this will all have passed?
I think there'll always be a need for marginal media, because the mainstream, I hope, will not be able to encompass the sheer diversity that is any of our societies. I mean, I would worry if everyone could fit into the mainstream, because that would suggest that it's not a very interesting society.
Will blogs become mainstream? I suppose they would be. They would, to a certain extent, become alternative mainstream. But what is important to me is that other than mainstream media like Al Jazeera or newspapers and magazines, which are owned by companies and individuals, blogs represent a voice which is totally untethered to anyone. It's totally free, and because of that, I think eventually blogs and the internet will become a voice which may rival or even supersede what information people read or glean from mainstream media and believe.
How much of a threat to the blog do you think is this Malaysian proposal that bloggers should register with the government?
Bloggers should. I don't think that poses any problems at all, because I'm a firm believer in bloggers standing by what they say and what they write. If you're an anonymous blogger, I don't even bother to read you, no matter what you're writing about. Because some days ago, somebody mentioned, oh, there's this guy who blogs and he writes about social and political issues, and his writings are very, very interesting to read. We must all go and read his blogs. I said, who is he? Oh, he can't reveal his name, because if he does, his job will be in jeopardy. If you want to say something, you put your name to it, and you stand by what you say. If you're not prepared to do that, then you don't.
Well, although the reality, though, is that in many Asian countries, individuals who quite rightly are prepared to stand up for what they say, and unpleasant things happen to them that shouldn't happen to them. Singapore and Malaysia, frankly, are quite moderate on that scale. I mean, other countries you can get disappeared or imprisoned or shot, not because...
I think that's because too few of them want to be put in that position. If one person comes out of the closet, sure, you can shoot them. But if 10,000 people are out there, I would like to see any
Well,
government trying to...
I guess my point is merely that, yes, I mean, I'm a firm believer that in the long run, we should be aiming for a blogosphere that believes in accountability.
But what we don't
think
have at the moment is an answer to the issues that the professor raised, which is whether there is truth and whether there is accountability in law. Because at the end of the day, a number of these problems that are being discussed are simply differences of opinion. And a difference of opinion in a country like Malaysia could end up with prison sentences, could end up with severe repercussions.
This was coming back to the issue. We were talking about the need for restraints on government's power. I think by the same token, since bloggers may well become mainstream and have a tremendous power at their command, I think there's a need for responsibility there too. So I totally agree with you, there's a need for accountability. If we were to look at the issue from the perspective of those who were hit by false accusations in a blog story, then I think we would have to say that there is nothing seriously wrong about saying, if you write this story, you must identify yourself.
What about the perspective of the blogger, the man in the street? And Singapore is interesting here. In Singapore, there is a speaker's corner, modelled, I assume, after the one in London. There is an area there where people are theoretically allowed to stand up and speak their mind. In practice, they're not allowed to do so. Is there much of a difference between a man standing up on a street corner and saying what he believes and the same man or woman putting those opinions on the blog? And should they both be equally controlled?
I think there's a difference. When it's a man speaking at the speaker's corner, basically he's addressing himself to the audience that is willingly there. But when you are on the blog, and actually with these days you're able to network with others, your reach is fantastic. If you want to spread defamation,
Does that, as far as you're concerned, does that actually make a difference? I mean, if you could attract 10,000 people to Speaker's Corner and you get 10,000 readers to your blog, is the issue the same?
Yeah, I think the issue is the same.
Well, not quite, because I think one thing you cannot control on the internet is the context in which something is heard. Yes. So I think last year we had a classic example, not on the internet but in the mainstream media, with the Prophet Muhammad cartoons. In the Danish context, many Muslim Danes would say that it was actually within the culture of Denmark to have such debates, but taken out of context, it was explosive.
And with the last couple of minutes that we have, that's an interesting final issue brought up. Control, you seem to think, is important. Freedom is what you seem to think is important. Quick couple of words on why control is less important than the ability to say what you like.
No, I didn't say that freedom is more important than control or the other way around. What I'm saying is let us all look at blogging and the internet and the voice of the bloggers as something which people have been doing for hundreds of years. What is blogging about? Blogging is merely a group of people sitting around a coffee shop table talking about issues that affect their daily lives. Not all bloggers are interested in the general election, in what the administration is doing, about the freedom of the press and so on and so forth. Not many people are interested in global warming or global finances, but they're all interested in community. This is what's happening to me in my daily life. I'm not liking it, I'm voicing it. If you're the politician, you're the member of parliament in charge of my constituency, this is what I want to tell you. And I'm going to try and get people to support me to tell you my case. And that is blogging to me.
And that's a very good place to leave the show. Gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed for talking to us today. My thanks to my guests, Cherry and George, Patrick Teo and Shad Salim Faruqi. And from all of us here at 101 East, it's goodbye.